Right, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to move on to the next speaker that we have with us today is Dr. Abba Aliyu. He is the managing director and the CEO of Nigeria's Rural Electrification Agency, where he leads national efforts to expand electricity access to underserved communities. With over 20 years of experience in the energy policy, he oversees major initiatives such as Rural Electrification Fund and the Nigeria Electrification Project, in partnership with the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. He has secured significant financing, including a 100 billion naira partnership with the First City Monument Bank and a $750 million partnership with the DARES program. Under his leadership, over 350 mini grids and 1.4 million solar systems have been deployed, impacting more than 8 million Nigerians and accelerating progress towards universal energy access. Dr. Aliyu, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me into this very important webinar. Would like to go straight to the topic of discussion. Within the timeline, I decided to just speak from my heart. So please, if you bear with me, I would like to start by provisional statement from my own perspective. If we are going to be honest, as far as I'm concerned, Africa does not have an energy problem. Forget about the fact that the World Bank, African Development Bank are pushing for Mission 300 with all the 600 million Nigerians that are, or Africans that are without electricity. Based on what I have seen, I'm of the view that we do not have an energy problem. What we have is a delivery problem. And if you look at it, for decades, we have treated electricity access just as a question of how much generation can we build. But from the current perspective, I'm of the opinion that the question should be, how do we get reliable power to people fast enough and in an affordable and sustainable manner? And that is why decentralized energy stops from being an alternative and becomes a strategy for not only Nigeria, but for the entire continent. And I tell you that Nigeria, from our perspective, we learned it from the hard way. We spent years expanding the grid, building generation plants, but yet millions of Nigerians remain unserved or underserved, to the extent that we account for the highest number of people without electricity in the entire world. So if we lift this model, instead of asking communities to wait for the grids, if we take this power to them through solar home system, through mini grid, through interconnected mini grids, and strengthen, rather than waiting to extend the grid, which is costly and takes a very long period of time to get it delivered to where we want it to be. I give you an example. There's a project that the transmission company of Nigeria that has been working on for a very long period of time, due to the challenge of grid right of way. That project has been in the project development stage for over 10 years. And this is quite a bit of the challenge that we are experiencing when it comes to extending the grid, rather than using a decentralized solution as a means to strategically provide cost-effective electricity to different communities. In Nigeria, adopting decentralized solution it's not now an alternative, it's a strategy. And that is why currently Nigeria is implementing the biggest publicly funded renewable energy project in the entire world. A $750 million project that will incentivize and catalyze private sector funding of 1.1 billion and to build 1,350 mini grids, of which 250 of them are going to be interconnected mini grids to electrify 17.5 million Nigerians. This is currently the biggest decentralized energy solution being implemented in the entire world. And that, to us, it's a clear we did not just come up with the DARE program to electrify the 17.5, but because we have seen it clearly that the most economically viable means of providing electricity to many communities in Nigeria is through the decentralized solutions, because it's the most cost effective, we have the resources that it's needed, and it's also serve as the most reliable means of providing electricity. And I also give you another example. We are currently deploying 50 interconnected mini grids to inject 288.9 megawatt of electricity with associated battery storage capabilities, which in future we envisage would be used as a means to even enhance the means of stabilizing even the national grid. And this is how decentralized energy solution can effectively serve as a means of, as a strategy to electrify Africa and Nigeria and Africa as a whole. And what made us to be very successful, it's been deploying clear strategy. One is working on the financing. We deployed public financing, and we also moved from the traditional means, which in many African countries, we use public resources to give contracts. We moved away from that traditional means, but rather we use the little public resources to incentivize private sector funding. So, for example, the $750 million that we are currently implementing will catalyze 1.1 billion private sector, which means that rather than just giving a contract of 750 million to deploy energy solution, we are now using $1.850 billion to deploy energy solution across the country. And that serves as an effective means of using public resources. So we deploy financing, but it's not only mobilizing the public financing, but utilizing it under the results-based framework, which catalyze private sector funding. That's the first. We also became very deliberate in incentivizing local financing. We worked with the local funders in the Nigeria to make them understand that the distributed energy solutions are infrastructure projects, and they should be treated as such. They should not be seen as a high-risk project because of the commercial framework that we built in, and as such, we were able to see a lot of local financing coming into the sector and providing the financing. In the introduction, reference was made by the FCMB and Lotus Bank, 100 billion each provided for the sector. And for those of you who are following the World Bank Spring meeting, will see that International Finance Corporation signs a financing agreement of $38 million financing for the Nigerian renewable energy companies. So this is a huge opportunity that is taking place in Nigeria. But beyond that, we also need to strengthen the private sector, the private sector that would access this funding and implement it in the way that we want it to be done, we decided to catalyze that ecosystem. And now in Nigeria, we have over 150 renewable energy service companies that have developed competency in deploying these renewable energy resources, and at the same time have capabilities to attract this financing, be it debt, be it equity, be it grant. We have now also achieved that. And we also moved a bit further to look into the bigger picture, because when you are implementing $750 million or by extension $1.8 billion project, you need to learn from the likes of India, who have done also large scale energy access projects. And based on the lessons from India, we now believe that there is need for Nigeria to have an to be very conscious of the bigger macroeconomic majors or microeconomic factors as a result of the implementation of this project. And what I'm saying here is, when we looked at the data, for us to implement this project, we would import close to 3 gigawatts of PV panels, and that using a funding to import all these 3 gigawatts of PV panels may be counterproductive, in as much as addressing electricity access is a key objective. But we now decided to look beyond that, to start to promote policies, framework, and strategies to domesticate production and manufacturing of renewable equipment in country. As at today, Nigeria is boasting of 300 megawatts of PV panels manufacturing capacity. Made in Nigeria PV panels produced in Ikotun in Lagos are now being exported into other African countries. And beyond that, based on deliberate strategy that we put in place under the National Nigerian Renewable Energy Innovation Forum that we held last year, currently Nigeria has a pipeline of PV manufacturing capacity to the tune of 3.7 gigawatts. If we deliver on this, Nigeria will be the biggest hub of PV manufacturing in the sub-Saharan Africa. That is a great achievement, and that is a strategy that needs to be done. Then lastly is to also look into making sure that we have availability of talent within the country for the deployment, for operation and maintenance, for mini grid monitoring, fintech requirement that it's needed to sustain this mini grid, and other associated services. And because of that, we also design a deliberate means of creating talent across the country. In partnership with United Nations Development Program, we implemented the RESCO Next Gen, where we train 131 youth as a first cohort, and the next cohort coming up in September, we are targeting 200. The entire target is to target 200 youth that will be, each of the trained youth would be a mini grid value chain talent repository. What I mean here is that we identify all the talent requirements, all the skill set required, from technical, from environmental and social impact, from community engagement, from even writing a grant, from operation and maintenance, from grid management, from tariff development, tariff setting, all those requirements. And each and every single person we train under this program goes through a whole 1-year program. And by the end of the year, he will have skill and competencies to be able to do every single competency requirement required in the renewable energy ecosystem. This is something also that we delivered, and this is something also that we achieve. Then lastly is the sustainability of our intervention. We are very conscious of the fact that renewable energy resources have lifespan. And we have seen it in some African countries where many mini grids have been deployed, and at the end of the day, they are now lay all over the part of the countries, not providing any value, and they are now redundant infrastructure. So learning from that, we developed a sustainability framework and the heart of that sustainability framework is the creation of renewable asset management company Ramco. That asset management company would be the last backstop, would be the main agency that will backstop the sustainability of our infrastructure, even in the event where the private sector failed to operate and maintain that asset. That renewable asset management company will take over that asset, fix it, and operate it over a period of time. And the renewable asset management also take over government deployed renewable infrastructure, leverage on that asset to create more fund for us to continue to deploy the infrastructure. As a result, in conclusion, as a result of all this intervention that we have done, currently, for the first time in the history of Nigeria, over 1,000 mini grids are being developed, projects are being deployed across the country. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, 50 interconnected mini grids that will inject 288.9 megawatts of electricity. It's been also deployed in the country. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, over 100,000 productive use of equipment that are solar-based solution are being deployed across the country. For the first time in the history of Nigeria, we have mobilized private sector capital that now becomes plug and play. Once you sign a grant agreement with Rural Electrification Agency, you would go to all these banks that we have partnership with, and you put down your grant agreement, and they give you financing within a timeline of 2 weeks. This is unprecedented. This has never happened in the entire African continent. And this is lessons that we have seen and we are sharing. Like I said, I'm in Kenya en route to China, and these are lessons. One of the things that I did in Kenya is to sit with over 7 African countries to show them how we were able to deploy our resources, how we are able to incentivize financing, our implementation framework. And the kind of feedback we get tells us that yes, for the first time, Nigeria is getting something right, and we are leading not only in Africa but in the world, showing the world how to deploy decentralized energy solution to address electricity access. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And if there's any question, I will still be available to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It's been great listening to your insights. In the interest of time, we are going to just pose you one question from the attendees and then we'll swiftly move on. I think the one important thing to touch base on would be, what is the biggest challenge that in your long and illustrious professional career you've come across when it comes to scaling mini grids, particularly from a Nigerian context, please?
The most immediate one that I will share is ability to influence regulators. You being the implementer, you are implementing projects and you have seen the realities on ground. But to be able to influence the regulators to change a regulation or develop a policy that would enhance the scaling up of that deployment is one of the critical challenge. It is on record. The recent mini grid regulation that the regulators signed out didn't just come like that. We exchanged 8 letters on record between Rural Electrification Agency and the regulator to convince the regulator to increase the mini grid caps and also simplify the environmental social impact process and the licensing. before. It took us 2 years to convince the regulator for them to come up with that mini grid regulation. So this is something that I have seen very challenging from my own perspective.
Thank you so much, Doc. And in the interest of accepting another question from the attendees, because they've asked a question previously, but we couldn't get to them, really quick, Doc, if you can make this one brief. The question posed reads, in Uganda, incentives for private sector participation exists but are very passive, which ultimately leads to continued reliance on external donors. What advice can you give to policymakers to improve incentives?
So things that works with us, one, it's first data. I did not mention it in my presentation. Having a clear data of what exists. If you are to attract financing, if you are to attract private sector, they need to know what they need to put in place, how their money is going to come back, and what are they going to invest. So having clarity of data in Nigeria, we map the entire country. We know the entire communities that exist, from communities that have electricity. Lagos, for example, the biggest community with electricity with over 2.5 million households, to a community that only have 2 households. We have that mapping and we identify the least cost of providing electricity. So that data would now serve to form a policy, to form a regulation, and to now develop a framework which should have a clear de-risking strategy. If you do not de-risk the sector and allocate risk to the party that best fit to take that risk, you would not get any traction from the private sector, and the public sector would just continue to carry the entire burden. So these are things that, in nutshell, needs to be put in place to have this traction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your exceptional insights. We really appreciate you taking the time and being a part of this conference. It's been wonderful hearing from you. Thank you so much, sir.